All right, good morning. Welcome. What a great week we're having so far. It's been amazing. Yesterday was very exciting with Public Day and had several thousand visitors. I'm Mark Mulqueen. I'm the program manager for the International Space Station program. With me is Chris Ferguson, director for CST 100 Starliner. We're going to talk to you a little bit about LEO and the ecosystem that started up there. So I don't know if any of you looked out last evening, but about 8:33 p.m., if you look to the east and south and about 56-degree inclination, you might have seen a very bright, what looked like a star going across the sky at about 29,000 kilometers per hour, and that was the International Space Station. To date, the International Space Station's traveled about 116,000 loops, orbits around the Earth. 116,000. It's traveled nearly 5 billion kilometers, which has clearly taken us to Mars and back a few times. About every day we go the distance of the moon and halfway back. So it is truly an amazing platform that agencies and contractors around the world put together, assembled to do great things in space. As we look out there, we really see that science and discovery and an economy in low Earth orbit can be achieved. It is with great investments to start. The international 15 nations that put the International Space Station together are certainly reaping the benefits of the platform, and about 103 countries around the world have now done payloads, science research on the International Space Station that has been very successful for their experiments, for their access to space, and for the simplification of getting this data back and being usable into investments and research here on Earth to make life better for all of us here on Earth and to help improve the crew's lives as they go further and further into space, into the future. It's a pretty exciting time for human spaceflight. Not only ISS, but the many new cargo delivery systems that are out there, the crew systems that are coming this next year. They are talking about the other platforms, both government-funded platforms, as in China, and commercial platforms that either start as an attachment to ISS or begin as a free floater, and more economy in space as we can continue to do development, discovery, research, and become a better nation prepared to find the benefits of low Earth orbit and zero gravity in our experiments and in our productions. You think about manufacturing in space and other opportunities that are out ahead of us, and all of those are really being experimented on ISS, which is really the cornerstone today in low Earth orbit. It's really, ISS is really iconic symbol of research for both humans and other systems in space. And this November, December, we will achieve 20 years for the first two modules that were launched and successfully assembled in space, which really started the beginning of the International Space Station, the FGB Russian module and the Node 1 US module. And to that date, this fall, probably in November in Russia and December in the US, we will have some celebrations for the achievement that's been accomplished. It's pretty amazing. It doesn't come without challenges. We have the engineers and scientists and agencies have overcome quite a bit, the contractors in the design and assembly of station. I'm very proud of what Boeing and along with other contractors have assembled for the U.S. side and its capabilities and for the success of our operations and the performance of the vehicle over time. It does require maintenance. It does require upgrades as we go through technology improvements, and we're seeing those each day as we proceed. Yesterday was also exciting. Gerst called down to talked to our public that was here. I heard 5,000 people attended the arena, which was pretty amazing. We had televisions in the other room that were also on, watching the downlink, and then eventually the handing over of commander from the International Space Station to Gerst, which will be for his next 3-month continued mission on ISS as the commander for the International Space Station. So pretty exciting for Germany and for the International Space Station overall. You know, we perform about 300 experiments, payloads, and research activities per month amongst the crew that is on board. It's about 60 hours of average a week that we do perform, that the crew performs science that is actually tracked to the research. And the discoveries are pretty exciting. You know, we're in clinical trials now for Duchenne's disease, a drug that would help extend life and quality of life for young men who have Duchenne's disease. That's in trials in Japan right now. Osteoporosis, there was discovery of bone loss on ISS as we developed drugs to help enhance our crew's ability to retain their bone mass with exercise, with supplements. Those supplements have come down to earth. There's now $1 billion of economic profit from companies who are now producing those and selling those for enhancing life here on Earth. We talk about cancer targeting drugs that are in research right now up on Space Station. We'll see what discoveries we have and what those can lead to. And then we also have infection fighting bad bacteria that's in infections that we have drugs and instruments that are trying to fight those to make sure not only first and second, third world countries that have infections here on the ground, that we can better prepare our humans for quality of life and recovery from these infections, but also as our crew goes deeper and deeper into space and the other planets, that they're self-sustaining, that they are safe and can do the missions that they are expected to do. You know, the HTV is up there right now. This is last year's picture when we were getting ready to do our spacewalk. We will be doing a spacewalk in the next month of October that will be taking out the lithium-ion batteries from the pallet and putting those on the power module. ISS continues to prepare itself for continued operations, and this will give us another power module with new lithium-ion batteries that will take it into the next 10 years of operations. The older batteries for nickel hydrogen are reaching their end of life, and a change out is necessary, and so we'll be preparing the robotic and EVA installation of those batteries into the space station. And we'll give it ability to provide power to the systems for ISS even in eclipse times. You know, ISS also stimulated a lot of capabilities in the cargo delivery systems, and new companies come on board that are delivering cargo to the International Space Station and will be there to deliver to other platforms in low Earth orbit and eventually in gateway and deep space orbits. These companies have new business, and it's great both in launching satellites, launching cargo, bringing that cargo to space station today, future platforms. And so there's a kind of a new economy in space already started that's being realized. We're also going to hear from Chris about the commercial crew, and there's going to be eventually the economies also for crew deliveries in both on International Space Station and eventually other platforms here in low Earth orbit. So, you know, spin-offs of space station into the LEO economy is very evident and continues to grow. So, in preparing for the international standards as we go into deep space, of course, you know we have the IDSS, the International Docking System Standards, that was the first really universal standard signed by all agencies. That really establishes the docking envelope, the interfaces, the power, the data, structural interfaces of these systems. This is the International Docking Adapter that took our old APAS on the PMA, adapted it to the new standard to make sure that it was compatible, was launched on a SpaceX several years ago, installed successfully, and is there ready for the receiving of the commercial crew vehicles. Both companies' vehicles are compatible with this standard, have been inspected and checked to the standard template. We'll have a second international docking adapter launched in the near next year that will give us 2 ports for the commercial vehicles to visit and really set us on our stage to have both the commercial delivery of cargo and crew for the International Space Station that will really enhance the ability to do more science, get more crew up there, support possibly other platforms attaching to ISS, and to continue the ISS's ability to perform research. So with that, I'd like to introduce Chris Ferguson. Really needs no introduction, but Chris is our CST 100 Starliner Director for Crew Systems. Chris, thank you.
Well, good morning. And I, too, would like to add my congratulations to the German people for having Alex Gerst take over as the commander of the space station. It is truly an honor, I think, certainly for the German people and for him, and I think illustrates just how far we've come in this true multinational effort to continue to observe the Earth from low Earth orbit and prepare to go to destinations beyond. This is not my chart, but I'm going to leave it up here because there's a little story here. Just a complete introduction of myself. I joined the NASA astronaut corps in 1998, and I flew 3 shuttle flights, the last of which was the final space shuttle flight, which departed the International Space Station in July of 2011. I joined Boeing shortly thereafter, and I suppose you could call me a commercial astronaut now. I'm just out here trying to prove that there is a professional career path for astronauts once they leave the comfort of their government organization, I guess. But, you know, before too long, we're going to get back up here, and we're going to dock right there. And I remember, sort of in a joking, but maybe not fashion, shortly before we left the space station in July of 2011, saying, what are we going to do when we leave? Because we're going to leave from this docking port, and we have no idea who's coming next. We actually considered, in maybe a joking fashion, saying, how about if we hang a sign out there that says, your spacecraft here, or this space for rent? And we quickly thought the better of it. It made more of a joke than it made sense, but you know, it's just so interesting how it's come full circle. And here we are a little more than 7 years later, and we're on the cusp of sending not 1 but 2 different commercial vehicles up to dock to the space station at this, and then the Zenith port, which is not too far away from this location. The Boeing team clearly recognizes the strategic importance of having an American capability to get international and American astronauts up and back to the International Space Station for 2 purposes. The first of which is, while the Russians have been magnificent partners in transporting astronauts back and forth, American astronauts and IP astronauts, they also filled a key gap for us when we lost Columbia back in 2003. And had it not been for that redundant way to get Americans back and forth, we would have struggled with how to manage the ISS while we were investigating the mishap and deciding what actions to take from that point forward. We've been operating in sort of that unilateral fashion since 2011 without another way to get there. I'd like to think that we have been good, but also fortunate in that we haven't needed a backup system. We now lie right here on the threshold of having not 1 but 2 partners with the capability to get back and forth. So first and foremost, that is key. Another reason is to, I think, cultivate really what commercial spaceflight means. NASA has made an incredible investment in 2 different companies to perform this, but what comes afterward? I would envision a operating rhythm that included cargo and crew commercially servicing any one of a number of orbital outposts in low Earth orbit, and also outfitting NASA or whatever space agency may be interested in beyond low Earth orbit destinations. Again, I'll use my analogy that if Mars is the pinnacle of Everest, low Earth orbit is base camp, and I can foresee a time where the commercial companies form the Sherpas that haul gear back and forth so that the exploration team can go and perform their mission. We have made a huge amount of progress in the Starliner build since we last met in Australia a year ago. We have 3 of these different vehicles in a various state of build. What you see here is the crew module. This is a portion that is reusable up to 10 times. And we'll alternate flights back and forth to the ISS. One of the 3 that are in build will be dedicated to our pad abort test, essentially a test of our launch abort system, which will be conducted in the spring of next year. At that point, we'll either retire it, or if the business presents itself, we'll build it into a full-up orbital vehicle that can be used multiple times. And in the interim, we will alternate between what we call spacecraft 2 and 3, and I promise there are more creative names coming, but we'll alternate between 2 and 3 to service the NASA mission. I mentioned that we have 2 key tests coming up. The orbital flight test we're working towards performing in the early part of next year. The pad abort test will take place shortly thereafter, which will set the stage for a crewed flight test, which will be mid-next year. And right now, the crew is in training. Perhaps some of you saw the announcement in early August where NASA picked, for both of the commercial providers, crews for their test flights, and then for the very first service flight, which is informally called PCM, for Post-Certification Missions Number 1. So it's exciting to have crews training on, again, American vehicles, working out of Houston, and of course for the competition out of Hawthorne, California, and to see actual crews in training. I think that the crews appreciate, perhaps, although Russia, again, has been a great partner and it's a great place to train, I think they appreciate being able to stay a little bit closer to home and not have the burden of those extra commutes to complete their training. The service module for spacecraft number 2 is already out at our El Segundo facility. For those of you familiar, we build, Boeing builds all of our satellites out at El Segundo. We actually have thermal vac, EMI testing capability, acoustic testing capability out there, and the decision was made early in the program to, after we assembled the vehicle at our factory at the Kennedy Space Center, we would ship it out to El Segundo to do the thermal testing. This is where the service module is today. I mentioned that the crew modules are reusable up to 10 times. The service module is a one-and-done type of design. We'll use it, and just after the deorbit burn, after it's 6 months on orbit, we'll deorbit that to the Pacific Ocean as the crew module continues to one of our 5 landing sites in the western U.S. The service module has a very innovative propellant system in that it can service not only the orbital maneuvering engines that we call RCS, or Reaction Control System, and OMAC for Orbital Maneuvering System. We have 2 flavors of thrusters that we use on board. In the event that we have a problem, an anomaly with the launch vehicle on ascent, all of the fuel that would have otherwise been ported to be used for orbital purposes can be ducted through 4 large abort engines that we effectively use as an ejection seat to get off the Atlas V should the situation ever arise. Of course, we never anticipate that, but it is nice to have a belt and suspenders during those dynamic times of flight. In the image, you can see at the bottom of the service module a solar array that we can use to help augment our batteries that we essentially use for the most of the part to get to docking. But if we point our tail to the sun, we can essentially tread water from a power perspective. And then you see the 4 circular outlines that are covered up, and they are actually our 4 abort engines that we would use if we had to. Okay, down to the what I call the big business end. The Atlas V has a very venerable history that dates back to the early 2000s of delivering over 75 payloads successfully to low Earth orbit. ULA, United Launch Alliance, of course, is the is the main integrator and builder of the Atlas V. They have been absolutely fantastic partners through this process. They are fully engaged in returning the Atlas flight series to human spaceflight. I don't think it's a big mystery, but the Atlas, this is not the first time the Atlas will be used to take humans to space. Back in 62, 63, the Mercury Atlas program had 6 different rockets. I think it began with MA6 or MA5 and went up to MA10. The first of which, of course, was John Glenn, and the last of which was Gordon Cooper. And then just in a matter of completing the history story, it was 56 years ago yesterday that Wally Schirra launched on MA8 to low Earth orbit in a 6-orbit mission before returning to the Earth. This Atlas V, that was an Atlas D series. It was alphabetically named up until we got up to about Atlas I, and then it turned from an I into a 1, and now we're up to Atlas V in the numerical series. This is not that Atlas. Of course, the Atlas family has over 600 flights in its series, and each one an incremental improvement on the previous version. Again, 75 flights to its credit, and again, in addition to the rocket itself, the launch infrastructure preparations are well under the way and essentially complete, which includes a new access tower to get the crew into the vehicle. Formerly, Launch Complex 41 had been a flat pad, no tower, with the idea of rolling the rocket out and launching it 24 hours later. They tried to convince the astronauts to just hold tight for 24 hours and we'll launch you when we can, but they clearly won their position and pushed back and insisted on a way to get in on launch day. So the launch tower is essentially complete. All of the infrastructure that's needed to support human spaceflight operations are complete, and ULA is well on their way to supporting first launch. In the lower right inset, you also see the Centaur upper stage. Centaur, of course, has been around a long, long time as well. The one big addition to the Centaur is the addition of the dual engine variant. The Atlas has flown on several, the dual engine Centaur has flown on several variants of different boosters, not the least of which was the Atlas series. However, ULA has gone to a single RL-10 second stage for the entire Atlas V program, and this is a return to dual engine operations, primarily to improve ascent abort performance, to give us a more acceptable thermal profile in the event we should have to abort and re-enter the atmosphere shortly after launch. Let's see. This is the quality of the photo is not great. It's actually captured from a video that if you follow me on Twitter, you can actually go watch the video if you want. There's a couple in there. This was taken during our CM and SM separation testing. Shortly before or shortly after the deorbit burn, we get ready to jettison the service module, and there's a frangible, actually there's 6 bolts that hold the two together. And like I said, if you go and watch the video, you can watch the service module separate from the CM here. It was a very successful test. And then you'll also see a test on there that illustrated, it was a test of separating the base heat shield from the crew module. What I neglected to point out when I had the crew module photo up there was, I mentioned that we do land on land. The base heat shield is jettisonable, which is sort of a unique approach for both water-based and land-based landings. The real reason that we have to jettison the heat shield after it's been used, and we do that at about 3,000 feet altitude, is to expose the airbags so that they can inflate and prepare for the final landing impact. Under 3 parachutes, we descend at about 10 meters per second, maybe a little bit slower. And even at 10 meters per second, that can be sort of a bone-jarring impact unless you have a way to absorb the final shock, and that's what the airbag system is used for. We've learned an awful lot through the rigorous ground testing. We've had some surprises along the way, but it wouldn't be developmental testing if we did not have surprises, which actually is the reason we test. Boeing has a very rigorous test-as-you-fly policy, and we have made some discovery, and I'll mention a little bit about that when I get to hot fire. But we have made some discovery, and of course, we made some engineering changes to mitigate any risks that have occurred along the way. I mentioned earlier the environmental testing that's coming up. and we will likely see our crew module ship out by mid-October, so we're about a week, 10 days away from that, where it will join the service module, and it'll go through a series of tests, the first of which will be acoustic, and then prior to going in thermal vacuum, we actually put a tent around it. So this is essentially a CST-100 and service module shaped tent that we use to irradiate it and expose it to the temperature cycles that it would otherwise see on orbit. I had the distinction of visiting out there early last week. We took the crew consisting of Eric Bowe, whom I flew with on STS-126, and Nicole Mann, who is a rookie astronaut who will also be on this flight, who is just a real rock star within the astronaut office. I think she stands about 5'4", and I think she can take me. So she's a real neat person. She also is a proud flyer of another Boeing product, the F-18, and it's great to have her on board. But we had a great chance to go out and shake hands with the team. They're very excited to receive our vehicle. I gave them, we talked about the number 127. That's the number of days they have to get that vehicle in and out, and made them own it. I think that they're well on board. And, you know, we did some introductory remarks with them, and I said, as long as a lot of you have been working here on satellites, I bet you never had your payload come and talk to you before. We're here, we're real, please take care of us. I think they appreciated that. Let's see, we do talk about parachute testing. Of course, I mentioned we do our initial part of our recovery under parachutes. We have a 5-test series, and it's a unique way to test parachutes that we have learned an awful lot about. I think our NASA partners have learned an awful lot about. But we actually haul what we call a boilerplate up to about 40,000 feet, and we release it from a helium balloon, and we let it fall and execute its entire recovery sequence on the way down. It's a really good full-scale way to get actual aerodynamics and opening type shock information data from our parachutes. We also will have a parallel, more traditional approach to testing parachutes that will be conducted using what we call a long lawn dart, which is essentially a weighted torpedo-like looking structure that we would roll out of the back of a C-17 and use to test single and multiple parachute configurations that will be coming up shortly after that. In all these tests, we're certainly pushing the limits of the spacecraft and its subsystem to the extreme so we can protect astronauts under just about any situation. It is worth noting that in more than 60 years of our partnership with NASA, we have lived through decades of incredible discoveries and technological advances. Every spacecraft that has gone back and forth to space has been a Boeing or Heritage Boeing product. And that certainly doesn't entitle us to the business in the future, but I really have seen since I've joined them the amount of breadth and depth with an even space shuttle pedigree that remains within the company and their dedication to human spaceflight. You know, I mentioned training is sort of a key element. When I left NASA 7 years ago, I thought I would never fly in a T-38 again, and then just last weekend, lo and behold, I found myself in the back of a T-38 again. This is a great way to get around the country, but more importantly, it's a great way. The space environment is challenging to train for. There really is no analog here on Earth. What I always maintained T-38 and high-performance jet training did for astronauts, it enabled them to gauge their reaction to time-critical emergencies that had life-altering outcomes if you don't do things the right way. So it's, again, great to be back and working with my NASA colleagues, even in the great areas of slipping the surly bounds of Earth. You know, the commercial crew program doesn't take the responsibility of offering full service lightly, and that includes training all the astronauts on Starliner systems. Some of you may recognize Sunny Williams off to the right there. She's a multiple-time space veteran with close to a year, or perhaps even over a year, on the International Space Station. There's Nicole Mann in the foreground, and Josh Casada. Josh and Sunny are the PCM-1 crew, and they'll be joined by a couple of our international partners when they launch, targeted at late next year. And even though I spend a lot of time on the road, my home, I still consider my home, the old Orbiter Processing Building number 3, now called the C3PF, or the Commercial Crew and Cargo Processing Building. And my office is right upstairs if they haven't closed it down, because I haven't been back there in 3 weeks. But when I'm in town, There is nothing better to do than to go down on the floor, shake the hands of the folks who are putting the rocket together that will take you to space. Plus, it affords me the opportunity to sort of at a moment's notice go, if somebody picks up the phone and call me and say, hey, come down and check this out. It just doesn't get any better than that. In addition to Nicole, Eric Bowe, I mentioned he and I flew together in STS-126. He'll be accompanying the Boeing test pilot on the crewed flight test mid-next year. Here he is actually running through what we call CM-130. It's one of our test and checkout procedures where he actually has an opportunity to climb in the vehicle and see the way it behaves. We have actually been training for this flight officially for about 2 months. However, we've had a closed-loop, full-up integrated simulation capability for well over a year that has exposed not just the candidate astronauts, but also the mission control team to the way the vehicle will operate. Of course, it's largely an autonomous vehicle, but by requirement, we have to have an ability to design a crew interface such that the crew can take over if need be to rectify whatever situation may have arisen and then turn the vehicle back over to the autonomy. We can also fly manually and dock manually if needed, although that is not the plan. Let's see, again, there's Sunny. She spent a lot of time working with us throughout the years. You know, it's been really interesting working with NASA partners. Even though it is a Boeing build, we do not take the advice of our partner astronauts lightly. And I have encouraged them to comment wherever able. And in addition to my fingerprints, their fingerprints are all over the crew interface. And it's been great working with them again. Starliner is designed for a land-based landing. However, if need be, we can land in the water. We don't intend to, we don't want to, but in an abort where we climb up just off the East Coast, there really aren't many options, so we have to prepare the crew and the rescue team for an eventuality such as this. Here you can see Josh participating in some of the training that we have gone through. You know, to a certain extent, the Starliner represents the future for the world in low Earth orbit. It represents the future for space explorers, researchers, international tourists, and other partner astronauts, and what an emerging LEO ecosystem may look like to you. It has been great to address you today. I think the format will be, Mark and I are going to be happy to take some questions as long as they're easy and there's no hardballs. So maybe I'm not sure if there's any mics in the audience, but I'm going to step over to the table and have a drink of water, and we'll take your questions next. And if not, we'll make up our own questions. They're much easier to answer than yours, by the way.
We have mics out there. Okay, I see.
Hand raised, speak loud, or grab a mic.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering what is the progress on the heat shield that will be used on the Starliner, and how does it perform compared to the heat shield of, let's say, the space shuttle?
So the heat shield, and I don't know what you wanted me to compare it to, but I will tell you that the composition of what we call the base heat shield in the Boeing vehicle is, it's very descriptively named BLA, which stands for Boeing Lightweight Ablator. Now that's very descriptive, isn't it? Some of you may recall what ablative heat shields, a type of material have been used for ablative heat shields in the past. Avicoat is a very popular one. This is a Boeing proprietary formulation that I am inclined to believe has had some test work elsewhere in a different type of environment. But it has been through full-up certification in our wind tunnels and thermal tunnels. So the BLA system is fully certified, and we actually have two different heat shields that are in a various state of build right now. The one that will be in the thermal vac will be sort of a mock-up, and then halfway through we'll actually switch that to put the real heat shield on. So it's coming along very well. let's just say the base heat shield is not on the critical path.
Thank you for the talk. Sergi here from Imperial College London with the question. I was wondering if the
Hold the mic up a little bit closer to you. There you go.
I was wondering if the Starliner would be able to be used on Falcon Heavy for a more cost-effective launch, perhaps in the future.
Okay, let me repeat that, see if I captured. Would the Starliner be used? I think I heard the word classified in there, but I'm not sure that's what your intent was. What are you asking if the purpose is?
If it can be used on the Falcon Heavy for a more cost-effective launch, or if it's compatible with other launchers.
We're still struggling. Hold the mic up a little bit closer, or maybe I can get...
He's saying, can Starliner be launched on Falcon Heavy?
Okay, there we go. Perfect. Hey, when we originally, taking you back about, 6 or 7 years, the idea was to not focus on a specific launch vehicle. We considered multiple options. The possibility always exists to go elsewhere. However, right now we are fully committed to the Atlas and the Atlas family. Some of you may know that the Atlas V will eventually be replaced by a ULA Vulcan series rocket. So we're also looking and considering what that transition would look like in the near future. But we have 8 contracted flights, and all of those will be on the Atlas V. The time is approaching where we would consider what we're going to do beyond that, and I'd like to think that we would bring any launcher that's available out there into consideration.
Hi, Chris. Irene Klotz with Aviation Week. When will you know if your flight test actually turns into a mini ISS research flight, and what kind of training will you be doing, or when would that start if it looks like you would have an extended stay?
Hey, Irene, how you doing? Great question. So I didn't go into too many details of what options are available to NASA for the crewed flight test. But as I think most are aware, we're coming up on the end of the contracted Soyuz flights that NASA has essentially, the seats that they have purchased off Energy, the Russian Space Agency. So if launch takes place later than planned, how are we going to cover that gap? Because we always have to have an American or international partner astronaut on board the ISS. And not the primary, nor I hope the secondary plan, but plan C, if you would, is to extend the crew, flight test crew, up to 6 months on the ISS if needed. Now, for a lot of obvious reasons, that's not ideal because it is a test flight after all, and this would be treating it more like an operational flight. But we would be there, and Boeing has signed up as a belt and suspenders in the event that the mitigations, we're a couple failures down. First, both of us launched late. 2, there's no other way to do it, mitigating it by other seats that might be purchased elsewhere. So we're down the failure chain. But the question, I think, is, when are you going to start training if need be? Truth is, we start training ISS astronauts now about 2 years in advance. We've actually already begun some notional ISS training, sort of the non-perishable types of training that don't expire over time. We've started doing. I could envision that a decision will likely have to be made in the March timeframe next year, and don't hold me to March. I've sort of rolling around what the right thing to do is we're going to have to make a commitment on when we think the launch will be, and if we need to augment NASA's capabilities, we're clearly going to have to start sort of more in-depth International Space Station training at some time, and I would envision that would be around the March timeframe.
Thank you. So I have two shorter questions. First one, other than the docking module, is there some other standardized equipment that is the same for the Starliner and for the Dragon? And the second one, is the Starliner going to be able to fly to the gateway?
Is the Starliner going to be able to fly where?
To the gateway, to the lunar station.
All right, don't let go of the mic because I might need some help on the first question, but let me answer the one that I did understand. Hey, Starliner is really, it's a low Earth orbit vehicle. Now that's not to say that it couldn't go beyond, it's just not designed to do that. We're battery powered, augmented by solar arrays, but in terms of consumables, if the space shuttle or Orion, say, is a RV, right, camper, the Starliner is really sort of like a wilderness camper. There is not the facilities to sustain crew for a very long period of time in there, nor is it designed to do that. Now, if the mission were to come up, could we come up with a service module that could propel us out that far? Could we tailor the systems to sustain a crew for, say, 7 days instead of 3? Of course. But right now, that's not the primary mission. And then, Mark, did you catch any of the first part?
No. Go ahead, the first one.
So the first one was the docking module is standardized for now all the capsules that we have in the world. Is there any other equipment that is used for Starliner and for the Dragon that is also standardized by NASA or, I'm not sure, any other agency?
Any other use for Starliner or Dragon 2?
The equipment, the hardware that is installed on the Starliner, is there any other hardware that is standardized other than the docking module? No.
Yeah, the acoustics in the room aren't good. Hey, we'll answer a question. Let's see if we hit the mark. I think you were talking about Starliner and Dragon docking capability. Let me just I'll give you a real quick and then I'll turn it over to Mark because I'm sure he's got some thoughts there. There is one IDA up there that, as Mark had said, covers the international docking standard. We're getting ready to put a second one up there. I think SpaceX is scheduled to take that up mid to late next year, which will provide 2 ports. So you would never think that you would need something like space traffic control to manage traffic back and forth to something like an orbital outpost. But the truth is there are an enormous amount of comings and goings. When you add 2 more commercial vehicles to this, we're going to have the ability not only to dock to either port, but also to relocate ports in the middle of a mission. But by and large, we would like to dock and stay at that port for up to 6 months and just remain there. Of course, in the event ISS needs a lifeboat to bring the crew home. But I could easily see where perhaps you had a Dragon docked at the same time that you had a Starliner docked. I think that's part of the... Yeah.
Absolutely. Currently, we have anywhere from 14 to 16 flights come to space station every year of cargo and crew. Obviously, some are on the Russian side, different ports, but the big CBM cargo ships, they're coming on the U.S. side. And as we move 2 ports to commercial crew docking ports, then we lose those 2 for access for cargo. But that still leaves enough to kind of play the game of ports and making sure that we have adequate real estate to receive the upcoming missions. I think both vehicles went through 6 degree of freedom testing, check fixture testing, dimensional inspections, and certification to be compatible with the standard and to be able to dock with ISS. So I think that's NASA's job to inspect both companies and make sure those are completed, and I think they have done that on both, and we're ready to go. So we'll receive who's ever ready to go next year and be ready to open that hatch.
Good morning. This is Ingo Muntener from German-based online forum Raumfahrernet. I have a question on the crew composition. It's the first time that a test flight will be with a crew composed of governmental and commercial crew. And I was wondering, who of you will be in command of this mission?
Yeah, good question. And I'll just paraphrase, who's going to be in charge? I'll leave you with this thought. Boeing owns the requirements, right? We have to satisfy NASA's requirements and prove to them that the vehicle that we built performs the mission that they intended for it to perform. As a result, we have about 250 key flight test objectives that we solely are responsible for ensuring are correctly performed over OFT and CFT. So I think you can read the answer in there. Boeing is ultimately responsible. Now, that said, I think what you'll find is that the NASA participant, the NASA astronaut, is a very accomplished astronaut in and of himself, and the way that we are envisioning that this will work is that the NASA astronaut will be largely in charge of the joint operations, so operating in and around the International Space Station, which is really where the NASA mission lies. I think you'll find Eric doing the lion's share of the work there, and then otherwise the Boeing astronaut will manage the Boeing flight test objectives and ensure that we take the vehicle up and bring it home in one piece, which is exactly what we intend to do. So hope that helps. Is Irene allowed to have doubles? I don't know. Oh, maybe not. Okay.
Hi, I'm Marcus from Royal Institute of Technology. Considering most American crewed missions have done splashdown, with the big exception of the space shuttle, how come you selected landing on land instead of in water?
So landing. Hey, we land on land all the time, right? In the space shuttle, we did it. But you're right. This is different for a capsule type vehicle. What we've really seen globally, with the exception, of course, with Soyuz, is Americans have landed in the water. So why do we want to take our vehicle back to land? Well, first and foremost, we intend to reuse that vehicle, and we have built it such that all the key components are in the crew module. We intend to reuse that up to 10 times. It's very challenging to reuse a vehicle that has been exposed to salt water. So that really is the primary reason. But not the least of which, you're able to get quick access to the payloads, especially time-critical payloads. You're able to get the astronauts out very quickly to what I think is a comfortable environment. Just for my short duration stays, I know that you don't feel real good when you come back. And I would imagine after 6 months, you're really not going to feel good if you are bobbing around the ocean. So it's nice to have that stable platform, get the crew out, get them on their way back to their homes in Houston, Texas, get the time-critical payloads out and get them shipped. But more importantly, I think from a reusability perspective is get the vehicle back to the Florida facility, sweep it up, clean it out, get it prepped and turned around and ready for its next flight.
Hello, my name's Megan Kane from the United States, and I wanted to ask a question about, with this being the beginning of commercial astronauts, what advice do you have to those of us who are starting our careers and are looking to potentially become commercial astronauts or work for or live in space as commercial astronauts?
Do you have an application into Boeing? Is that what I understand?
I do not.
You do not, okay. I told Boeing, I said, stand by, once it becomes relatively public knowledge that there's a Boeing astronaut getting ready to go into space, you're going to have to run your own astronaut selection process. I don't think Boeing wants to get into that business. I think they're going to accept them through the NASA program. And the parallel to that, in my opinion, is there is an enormous number of commercial pilots out there flying commercial airplanes that cut their teeth in the military, right? Flying a government airplane with a government label on them. And I can foresee a future where astronauts that flew government spacecraft working for the government could go on to have career paths that included life beyond the NASA astronaut office and perhaps elsewhere. So I think in the short term, the key to success is still through the NASA astronaut selection process. That's not to say that any one of the commercial companies, Blue Origin, SpaceX, Sierra Nevada, Boeing, might someday start up their own astronaut flow. I think the way we envision it right now, however, it's much more cost effective to work through the NASA system and pull those folks in when their time at NASA is completed.
And don't forget your own agencies, in-country space agencies really do selection processes for their astronauts and then supplemented with NASA training for what's done on ISS. So it's a pretty big process.
I see the microphone walking somewhere. Where is it? Here we go.
Doesn't matter. Hi, Kanterian, Family Entrepreneur Magazine. I would like to know how much is going to cost me. How much do I have to pay in order to make it on a journey on the capsule?
How much do you have?
Not enough, I believe, for the moment. But maybe I will work very hard in order to make it.
I don't think we're ready to give out public pricing at this time, so stay tuned.
So what has been made public is years ago when private astronauts, cosmonauts started flying on Soyuz, right? You can look at some of the pricing numbers there. I think started at 20 million. And then you can also look at what NASA pays an Airgate to take their astronauts up. I want to say the last contract was 84, if I remember correctly. Was it?
It's the current one with Boeing is 75.
75, okay. So somewhere around there, let's just say that.
I'm sorry, I arrived a little bit.
Do you have that much?
No, not yet.
No, okay.
But,
well,
I will look into the future.
Maybe we can arrange some financing. No, I'm kidding.
Can you just repeat? I'm sure you already said it. Where are you going to take off from after Baikonur?
We're going to need help with that one.
Where is going to be?
Mic close to the mouth. There you go.
Where are you going to take off from after Baikonur?
Oh, okay. No, great question. Atlas is currently launched on the east and west coast of the United States at Vandenberg and at the Kennedy Space Center. But the only launch site that will allow us to service the International Space Station is off the Kennedy Space Center. So that's where we're going to be. Actually, our factory is on the Kennedy Space Center. Believe it or not, Kennedy Space Center and the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station are two different locations. We build the vehicle at KSC. We launch it out of Launch Complex 41 at Cape Canaveral facility. And it's a great segue because we didn't discuss it. The Starliner does have the capability to carry up to 7 passengers. I mean, we initially designed it that way. When the NASA requirements became infinitely clear that it was really just 4 people that they were looking for and cargo, we redesigned the interior of the vehicle to accommodate cargo, but we left 5 seats in. So it's a 4-seat mission with a 5-seat capability. So I think you can sort of read between the lines of where that 5th seat may be utilized someday.
Hi again. I have a question about the heat shield, actually. So it seems that all the newly developed systems are all going back to the ablative heat shield, and I was wondering what are the advantages over like the tile system that the shuttle, for example, was using?
Okay, I'll tell you what part of that I did understand, right?
I'll come up front now.
Okay.
The question was about the heat shield. Now, I was saying that all the newly developed systems now seem like they're going back to the ablative system, and I was wondering what the advantages are over the tile system that the shuttle was using, for example.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so what are the advantages of an ablative system versus a tile system? The truth is the hottest part of the space shuttle was the reinforced carbon-carbon on the leading edge of the wings and the leading edge of the nose. And that saw temperatures upward of about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Tile can't take that. Okay, tile is something more of a moderate temperature, say 1,000 to 1,500 degrees. So what you will see once on launch day, you will see a system of white and black tiles on the back shells. So it's the upper conical portion and blankets. So a very similar external system to what you saw on the space shuttle. And then to take the blunt of that very high heat, because the tiles can't take it, the very high heat needs an ablative system. When the shuttle re-entered the atmosphere, it took place over the course of thousands of miles. And we never exceeded more than about 1.5 Gs, because it was a very gentle, very shallow re-entry. We come in a little bit steeper, 1.5 degrees or so. As a result, the Gs build to a higher value than we saw on the shuttle, and with higher Gs comes higher heat, so we need a better system other than tile or reinforced carbon-carbon to protect us.
Thank you. I was wondering how the astronauts, especially the ones from the shuttle era that were used to pilot their vehicle, are reacting to flying autonomously, and how much persuasion, how much psychology is needed.
You know what? I'm sure that is a wonderful question, and if you walk up to this stage, we will actually be able to hear you. Can you come on up? Running is even better.
Sorry about that.
Put the mic down. There you go.
I was wondering.
Okay, so if I can summarize the question, it is, are astronauts happy being shuttled around space in an autonomous system, or would they be happier controlling things manually like we did in most of its predecessors? And you know, the truth is, we have to sort of go where the technology is, and first of all, requirements drove us this way. We have to have an uncrewed capability, and the underlying principle behind that is the astronauts' primary mission is to spend 6 months aboard the International Space Station. We want them to focus on that 6-month mission. The act of getting them there and returning them back safely is an administrative function, if you will, right? That's not supposed to be the key part of their mission, and therefore we don't want it to occupy the preponderance of their time to train to get ready, which is why it's designed to be autonomous. Now, we will understand after the first several flights just how much training involvement will be necessary to prepare for eventualities like a manual docking. You can look at, say, the Soyuz parallel. Even though the Soyuz system is designed to operate autonomously, there have been manual instances where the crew has had to take over. I don't anticipate that, but we will learn things as we continue to operate and mature the vehicle. So I think, you know, we understand that the era of autonomous driving is upon us. Commercial airplanes are essentially flying autonomously from the moment they get the wheels in the well until they land in some instances. I think we see Uber, we see Google cars, we just see that autonomy is in the future, and this is a good place for it in spaceflight. Now, we'll of course learn along the way about what's best to operate manually, what is not, but I am confident that this is the wave of the future for human spaceflight.
All right, I think that's close enough to the time, and Chris and I'll be off to the side if there's a few questions to follow on here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.